Well, good morning, folks. Got a project here today. What we're going to do is we're going to put together a McCulloch SP81. This saw is one that we've had here for a while, and it's probably a 1973 or 74 vintage. It ran fine at one point, but then we had a little issue where it wouldn't start and had no compression. So we finally took it apart. And as you can see here, we're getting into the process of basically putting it back together. And I'll show you the issue. This is the old piston here. And if you look real close, right there by my thumb, you'll see where, for some reason or another, it got scored. And it seized the rings right there, and they wouldn't expand. So that left us without any compression. So what we were able to find was a replacement piston, actually a used one, since these saws are now hitting on 45 years old, so there's not a lot of parts available for them. So what we've got here is a used piston, and you'll see there's a slight difference in them. This one here, the bad one, and this is the bad edge right here. You'll see that the rings are a little bit smaller than the rings on this piston. If you look at them real close together, they're a little bit different. Now what probably happened is McCulloch was famous for swapping out parts as their production runs progressed. So my guess is that while this is the correct part number for the saw as listed in the illustrated parts list, my guess is that as the production run went on, they might have moved to this piston with the slightly narrower rings. And this one looks to be in pretty good shape. The cylinder bore is pretty good. It's got a chrome liner in it, so it didn't appear to do any damage to the liner. So we're going to go ahead and put it back together today. And one thing, the first order of business is we're going to disconnect, take the crankshaft or the connecting rod off here, and we're going to put that in the oven for a little bit, probably to 250 degrees for 10 minutes or so to heat it up a little bit, and hopefully we'll be able to put that wrist pin right into the new piston and begin putting it back together. So we'll stay tuned. Okay, little update here. We've got the new piston in. We were able to get the connecting rod put in, and without too much difficulty. I heated up the connecting rod in the oven at about 250 degrees for maybe 10 minutes or so. And I also put the wrist pin in the freezer to kind of shrink it. The idea being that if you expand the hole in the connecting rod a little bit and cool the wrist pin, it'll shrink it just a shade, enough to slide in there. And it went in okay. I did need to persuade it a little bit, put it in the vise here, and I don't really like to do that, but this one required that to kind of nudge it in there. And so we got that set. We got it oriented properly to the exhaust port side and the intake side of the piston, which are different. And we've got the cap on the connecting rod there, as you can see. And we're ready to go now, and we'll put some, there's really no gasket that goes on this right here, but we're going to use this sealant that is used for two-cycle motors to put basically a sealer around the crankcase here, and then we'll start putting that together. So once we get that done, we're then moving along to start to assemble the other pieces. But clearly the most critical stuff is getting the piston in and get it oriented properly. And so we'll start putting the rest of this crankcase together, and we'll post up later. Okay, made some good progress. We basically got the crankcase reassembled. Got the piston and the crankshaft in there. Seems to be working fine. Good and free there. Also, you can see where a little bit of the sealant squeezed out when we torque down the bolts. There's actually 4 bolts that hold this crankcase. There's 4 little ones about like that right there, you can see. When I took this off, I had to do a little, took a little Yankee ingenuity, because my original socket was too large to get next to the casting there and get a full grip on that nut. So what I did is I took one of these sockets and just ground it down just a shade. You can probably see that there. And then that way it fit right in there okay and got a good grip on that nut. Inside the oil case here are 4 more bolts that also hold the head, or excuse me, the bottom of the crankcase to the cylinder head. This anti-vibration damper right here, this one was broken when I took it off. And what I was able to do, it was broken right in here, and I was able to take some epoxy, some 2-part epoxy, and put a little bit on there, clamp it, and left it overnight, and I think it's going to work real well for us. So now we're trying to keep everything nice and clean as we move forward here. We'll start putting the saw back together, and it'll start taking shape. It'll start looking a little bit more than just a yellow cylinder. So we'll keep you posted and update you a little bit later. Okay, little progress update. Things are starting to look like a chainsaw now. We've got pretty much all the engine components put back together, with the exception of the carburetor. We don't have the carburetor on yet, but we've got all the points in the condenser set. We've got spark, which is a key component here. Now we need to get some fuel to it, and in not too few more minutes we'll be ready to put this thing in the vise and see if we can if we're successful in getting it put back together properly. That is, we're going to give it a whirl and see if it starts. Anyway, so that's kind of the latest. Stay tuned for the next update. Okay, we got her all put back together, and you can probably tell by some of the blue smoke here that we got it running. I'll tell you this, it's got a lot of compression now. So let's crank her up here, and we're about ready to call this done. So we push on the decompression release valve right there, switches off. Some good old McCulloch horsepower there. This thing is done. I think it turned out pretty good, actually. I'm pretty pleased with how it came out. I'll play around with it a little bit for the next couple days and make sure we've got things broken in properly and the rings seated, and put this one back on the shelf. Okay, I think we're ready to go here. What we're going to do is just give it a little final test, make sure it idles properly, and all of that. So we started up in the side, brought it out here to kind of give it the final run through. So let's see what we've got here. think we're going to call that good. Probably take it out next week and put it in some timber, see what we can do. But I think we're going to be good for here right now. Hope you enjoyed the video.